Signs of autism in women. What do the symptoms of autism actually look like in real life? It's not always easy to see how behaviour in real life matches up with the official diagnostic criteria. So today we're joined by Barb Cook, a neurodivergent developmental educator, who is also the editor of Spectrum Women magazine and co-author of the book in 2018, Spectrum Women, Walking to the Beat of Autism. We're going to be looking through the criteria through the DSM-5 and relating that to real life presentations and stories from real women. So thanks so much for joining us, Barb.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you've identified as neurodivergent. What does that mean for you, just briefly?
Sure, neurodivergent. So I was formally diagnosed on the autism spectrum in 2009. And along with that, I was also diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia. So I identify as neurodivergent because my neurology is quite a combination of a few different things. So that's sort of like, for me, gives us sort of that unique expression of who I am. There's lots of different elements that makes up who I am.
Now, it's a pretty common story that women are often diagnosed much later in life, often after the diagnosis of one of their children. Was that your personal experience as well?
No, actually, because I don't have children. I did have cats at the time. So, I mean, cats do have, they are on the autism spectrum, so we could look at it that way. But I actually got diagnosed after my partner who was diagnosed on the spectrum. I was originally looking up different things because he was quite different to typical people out there. And it was one day I come across it on the internet doing Google search, Aspergers syndrome, and I went, my goodness, this is everything that he is. But also in that realization, I'm going, oh my goodness, this is exactly me as well. And so from this, he got his diagnosis in 5 minutes. Very typical expression of someone with Asperger's at the time. It was easy to see and diagnose. It was quite interesting because at the time when I was speaking to the psychologist, he was also there going, so do you think I've got this Asperger's syndrome? Oh yeah, it's the plain as, you know, on the nose of your face. So yeah, we've diagnosed you in 5 minutes, but they were more interested in talking to me. But at that particular time, I didn't get that diagnosis of being on the spectrum. I got misdiagnosed as having bipolar disorder and social phobia. So this is quite common with women. So there's this misdiagnosis of, no, you can't be on the spectrum. You present, you know, quite normal, as I tell you, but because we mask our symptoms and that sort of stuff, it makes it a lot harder for them to see. So it comes across as quite often many women will get diagnosed initially with a personality disorder, so borderline personality disorder, a mood disorder or depression or anxiety. So it can take quite a few years before they actually get that diagnosis of being on the autism spectrum.
So in that case, what are some autistic traits in adult women that are maybe not as stereotypical and as easily to see from the outside as some of the male traits?
That's a really good question. So what I might do is I try and explain it in certain situations that may make that presentation stand out a little bit more. So for example, say for girls, quite often young girls at school will present as being the model student. You know, they get all the straight A's, do really well, the quiet one, the helpful one, that sort of stuff. But when they go home, it's absolute opposite. They have meltdowns, they can't cope, don't want to talk to people, leave me alone. Hypersensitive, it's because they've been trying to keep it together all day. So this again is where that masking comes in, is hiding how they're presenting. That makes it very difficult to see those differences. So women and girls tend to be very, very good at this, but that's not exclusive to women and girls as well. So all genders can do this as well. So I just want to make that clear on that. But it's more tendency that they will do this. And this can also be expressed in things like in the workplace as well. So this is the same thing again. The person that may be the workaholic, stays back all the time, do all that sort of stuff. They're the ones that sort of like maybe getting missed because they present perfectly fine, but they're trying to hide it and they're coping within these environments. So there's things like they may not understand what's actually going on or what is expected from people. So they may mimic people that are around them and copy them and do things the same as them. So there's other things like, so in the workplace, there may be anxiety driven as well. So things like, I'm not coping with these tasks, but I'm too afraid to ask for help. I may have challenges in different things and not understanding, say, what my boss has asked me to do. It's not clear to me. It may be a bit vague, or I may be taking it as a totally different interpretation of something. So there may be this fear behind asking for support and that sort of stuff. So there's situations like that. Other things that can make a difference as well. I was just trying to think back about my own experiences that may stand out, that might not stand out. So typical was my intense interests. When I was younger as a girl, I was passionate about Barbie dolls. So you think, oh, that's a very typical girl thing. Oh, love their dolls, play with that sort of stuff. But for me, with the dolls, I collected them. So I would buy them, go inspect them for any flaws and that sort of stuff, stick them back in the box, put them on my dresser, and that's where they would stay. So for me, it was collective purposes, not as in to play with them or use them in that sort of like typical girls would do. And so if I had a friend come over, they would want to play with the dolls, and I would get really, really upset going, no, you can't touch that. Don't move that from that position. And so that also happened as well, because again, in my room, at the end of my bed, I had this final bean bag. So I had all my stuffed toys. They were all in 3 lines. It had all their positions. You can't touch them, don't move them. If one of them went missing, absolute meltdown. So it was that case of controlling my environment as well. So I needed to know where everything was. It had to be in its place, and there was a particular structure to these sort of things. So that was a couple of things I was thinking of myself. Other things maybe, girls may, I know for myself, I was very much a tomboy, so I enjoyed doing what guys did more than what the rest of the girls did. So not just the Barbie dolls, I would be the one that'd be out on my BMX bike. I'd be hanging up with the guys, trying to outdo them on everything that they did as well. So I didn't have much of this fear factor as well. So there was that sort of thing. And another example for myself that was different is, I suppose, to typical, I used to like the feeling of freedom in space. So I'd like to bounce and jump and that sort of thing a lot. So for me, trampoline was an absolutely wonderful thing for me, because I could never get high enough. So I would be inventive and try a pogo stick on there to get higher, one of those hopper things, put that on there, get as high as possible. So for me, freedom in space and that sort of stuff. So that was something very different for me in that sort of thing.
So they're all really great examples. Let's link these examples to the 7 diagnostic criteria in the DSM-5. So one of the diagnostic criteria is insistence on sameness and inflexible adherence to routines. And another one is highly restricted fixated interests. So I think your example of the Barbie dolls is a good example of that.
Yes, absolutely. So for me, it was that very restricted. Everything would have to have its place. And I was also fortunate as well, because my own mother was also on the spectrum. So everything was very routine. So it was really, we had everything at the same time. Dinner must be at this particular time of day. You have the same food on every day. So for me, I was very lucky in the sense of, I guess I'd flying under the radar, but also being back in the 70s and 80s, you know, this wasn't around to get diagnosed, is a case of, because I had that rigid sort of structure at home, I thrived in it. So it was really good for me. And I didn't have a lot of friends, so I was quite happy with being on my own as well. So I could be left to do what I want in my own way, in my own routine. It's when people come in and try and change it, that's where it becomes really, you know, I'm losing control of my environment when other people come in.
So 2 of the other criteria are stereotyped or repetitive motor movements that we often associate with stimming, and a related one of the hypo or hyporeactivity to sensory input. And you already mentioned about the need to bounce and things like that.
Yeah, that's right. And for me, another sensory thing is with clothing, the touch and that sort of stuff. So for me, I counted them. I've actually specifically went and did this. I've got 26 pairs of the same black leggings, the same material, just in 2 different lengths. That's all I did. So I can wear them in summer, and then I can wear them in winter. For me, because I like the tightness of material on my skin, I don't like the lightness. Anything that's light that touches my skin really, really aggravates me. So that also goes for when it's windy days. My hair, I would like to pull it out because it's really, really, really annoying to me. Just that light wispy touches and that sort of stuff. And it's the same with people. So if someone comes up to me, gives me a light hug or a touch, it actually is a really horrible feeling. It just makes me go, oh, get off me, don't touch me. It's a really, really horrible feeling. But in the opposite sense, so this is where this tightness of clothing is that pressure. So for me, it's a case of, if you to give me a hug, basically crack the bones in my back, I would really enjoy that. And so it's very much that sort of, everything has to be really quite intense for me for sensation wise. And other things I'm just trying to think as well is I also have, which is quite interesting, lots of people have weighted blankets and this sort of stuff for that pressure as well. I have a weighted cat. So I've got a big cat, life size, sits on your lap, lots of weight, absolutely perfect because it's got the soft material. So it's a material that I like as well. So you get that sensory input while you're sitting there, you're having a stressful day. I might not be allowed to have a real cat these days, but I've still got that same sensation, that input that I'm getting, as long with the weight as well.
Okay, great. And I can also see how as we get older, as adults, it's harder to see these behaviors because children let out if they don't want to wear clothes, or if they don't like a particular food, or they might actually be physically bouncing around everywhere. Whereas adults, we're more likely to find a solution that flies under the radar, I suppose.
Absolutely. I think we can tend to adapt a bit, but we can also cause a lot of stress to ourselves if we don't actually know. And this is something I emphasize a lot in the work that I do. We really do need to understand who we are to ensure we have, the best life for us. So if we don't know what we're experiencing challenges with, say, for example, we don't know what our sensory profile is, how on earth do we know exactly what do we need that can support us in these situations, or how do we convey that to someone that we need support? So identifying and learning about ourselves is critical. And quite often I've found with women, they will often question themselves, why are all these things going on? But they don't have the answers. And it's not until later on down the track, say in their 30s and 40s, like me, it was my late 30s, getting the diagnosis, you then look back going, oh my goodness, I was doing everything wrong. I need to start reevaluating my life, change things, change the whole career, change everything in my life because it was not serving me. And through doing that, over the past, what am I now, nearly 12 years, it has been such a big change in how I feel about myself, how I feel about in the world. To be honest, I don't think I could be actually more happier with my life than it is now. So I've turned it around to serve me and not what everybody else wants. To me, it's a case of everybody else, too bad. This is what I want to do. This is what makes me happy. And I'm quite happy with that.
So understanding our own autism makes a huge difference.
Yes.
Let's look now at the social side of things. The other 3 outwardly visible signs are social emotional reciprocity, nonverbal communication, and relationship management. Right. So now we've covered the 7 diagnostic criteria in section A and B of the DSM-5, which is a very medical book. So that's why we're trying to get more of a real life sense of what that's like. So in terms of social emotional reciprocity, what does that often look like in women in your community?
Socializing. It's quite an interesting one because quite often I've thought to myself, I know for myself I'm quite happy with my own company, and a lot of women do feel like that, but we also want to have the friendships. We also want to be included in the groups. We also want to be asked to come out to social gatherings. As long as we can have that invitation to feel that we're still being accepted and not come along, we can choose whether we want to go. We can choose whether we can plan to prepare to go out for a situation like that. So we can go, all right, I'm going to have a social situation at the end of the week. All week during that, I'm not going to do anything else that will overload me and overwhelm me, so I can enjoy that time with friendships and stuff like that. But that's where that misconception is, okay, we like time by ourselves. Oh, you must not like having friends or people around. Oh, we do. We absolutely do. It's just on a different sort of level. So for me, my mistake pre-diagnosis was I'd try and socialise too much. It would become extremely overwhelming. I would struggle enormously then communicating with people after that, because I'd be so overwhelmed. I'd be so very irritated with people. So I would lose a lot of friendships through that by trying too hard to do that sort of stuff. So if I knew back then, in a case of I could only manage 2 hours socialising, then go home and do, my friendships would last a lot longer. And so that's something I've learned through that. So I limit the amount of time I have with friends and that sort of stuff. And online, I find as well, if we're communicating by written word, I find it easier to understand what people are meaning rather than verbally. For me, verbal conversations are really quite difficult. And I feel I don't have a lot of time to actually understand sometimes what they're talking about. Mm. And the other thing too, in conversations, is I may not be interested in what they're having to say. So if I'm a group of typical women, I have no interest in babies or, you know, how many kids you're going to have, and oh, this is what I made my husband for dinner, or this, you know, I mean, this typical chit chat, gossip, socialising thing that they do. It doesn't fit with me. And a very funny example was there at one point a friend had a fairly young child, just I think about 6 months old. Here, do you want to hold this? And I held it out on my knee, not hold like this way you're supposed to. What am I supposed to do with this? And it was like, none of it to me was natural. So I knew from a very young age that I wasn't going to be a mother, and this wasn't my career path, whereas other people are. And it's perfectly fine. For me, my choice was, I enjoyed my career, I enjoyed the time that I did, and I enjoyed having cats. So that was, for me, that sort of stuff. But yeah, so for women, it's quite often, it's that we may prefer the intellectual conversation rather than the, like I said, the social chit chat sort of stuff. We can also get shunned from conversations because we may want to dominate it with what we're talking about, a particular thing. Or we may get looked at, oh, you're a bit odd or a bit weird that you don't want to talk about these things. Or so we get shoved out to the outer, or we can also set ourselves up it's for bullying, because people look at us going, oh, why don't you fit in with us, crowd, or fit in with this hierarchy that some of the girl groups may have as well. So that makes it very difficult in that sort of respect.
A key point that you were talking about is around the processing time and energy to, so for example, in your case, the auditory processing and speaking, come on, anyway, I don't always do words well. You know what I mean?
I know,
that's the kind of thing that is relatively easy to mask, because you can just pretend that you know what's going on, even when you don't know what's going on. So sometimes we don't see those kind of things on the outside.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we can pretend to do that. We can watch what's going on and mimic back to what people are doing. We can get really, really good at that. And that's something I've learned from other people who said we can be actually the ultimate psychologist, because we spend so much of our time observing and watching what other people are doing. We can get it down to a T. And so that's another, like in career-wise, this is why we could be excellent actors and actresses, because we know how to copy personas of other people, because we don't have to be ourselves, we'd be that other person perfectly.
And what about in the non-verbal communication aspect? So that's your body language, your tone of voice. I know in the autistic community in general, you get some fairly odd characters with entertaining quirks. What do these tend to look like in women?
They tend to be very, very subtle. You don't really see that difference in that sort of thing. There may be the girl may appear like, say, the geeky type or something like that. Someone will say, oh, she's a bit nerdy or that sort of thing. So that's what they may observe. But a lot of the time, because we're so good at this masking and mimicking, we'll look like similar to our peers in that sort of stuff. It's or we could be like the intellect as well. So that tends to go, people, I suppose this is where I'm more talking about in school and that sort of thing. This is how you sort of like, they're a little bit different, but there's nothing significant that you can see in you know, from the typical children within that classroom. So it doesn't really stand out. I mean, for me, eye contact is a really, really, really difficult thing. And I know with men, I would say it's just as bad. It's just not just as bad, sorry, just as difficult for women to do, because I find it incredibly painful to do. And especially with new people, I can't look at them at all. For me, I have to just look at the floor and listen to them, because I'm trying to understand what they're saying. So I'm trying to listen to the tones of their voice. And I've got really good at hearing the differences through their voice, whether they're being an honest person or if they're sort of like someone I wouldn't trust or that sort of stuff. I've learned to pick that up really well. But if I had to look at them, it would just be a whole jumble of everything, and I wouldn't understand a damn thing they were saying to me.
So we should wrap up soon. Are there any other common experiences of autistic women that would be significant to share?
I was thinking, let's see, no other common experiences. I was thinking that doesn't a lot of people know about, or it's becoming a little bit more prominent in research, is things like eating disorders. There has been quite a correlation in research that they're finding that about 30% of autistic women will also have anorexia or an eating disorder. So that's something to be very, very mindful of and to look out for, especially if there's any concerns around diet or, you know, weight loss, that sort of stuff. And it may not be also in the typical way it's done too, because it could be things like with the rigid behaviours and how I got to calorie count. It will be very specific. It'll be very specific food groups in quantities and that sort of stuff. So that restriction there may be a good indicator. And also the restriction can also be a sense of control. So if they're not having control of the environment or feeling unsafe and that sort of stuff, the restricting of food can also give them that sense of, I'm back in control of myself. So that was something that might be worthwhile looking into.
Mm-hmm. It's also worth mentioning that so I've recently done a video with mainly examples that I came up with based on the autistic men that I know, and now we're doing this video, you know, trying to portray the female perspective. But it's worth mentioning that the differences within a gender are usually significantly more than the differences between genders. So an individual person could fall anywhere on the spectrum in any sense of all of these things that we've been talking about. So while we talk about genders and we talk about things that are more likely or more common, it's just one way of grouping behavior, because we can see this kind of behavior across all genders, across all people. So that's
Yeah.
worth remembering as well.
Absolutely, I 100% agree with you there. And I've even had feedback from people that have read the Spectrum Women book, which are males and non-binary and transgender, have all commented, I find so much relevant information to my own life through the book that we wrote. So yes, it's absolutely applicable to everybody.
Okay, so we'll wrap up. I'm just going to list through the 7 signs from the DSM-5 again. So we talked about social emotional reciprocity, non-verbal communication, relationship management, which is a challenge for everyone on the spectrum, repetitive motor movements that we often call stimming, insistence on sameness and inflexible routines, which we also mentioned, restricted fixated interests, and hyper or hyporeactivity to sensory input. So that's the medical side of this. And I hope in this video and this interview today, we've tried to humanize that a little bit so that you can get a better idea of what it looks like in real people. So thanks a lot, Barb, for your time.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks for that. Bye.
Bye.